All right, what's up, guys? I'm gonna hide the GoPro from the frame. We're gonna do a full-on tapping tutorial. Really excited to share this with you guys. Tapping is one of the most important and popular concepts in Kendama, obviously. If you watch any of the best players, if you think of the KWC tricks, almost all of them include some sort of tapping. I think the concept of tapping can be this whole part of Kendama that no other concept can even come close to, because the level of difficulty and how cool it is, and the physics behind it they don't make sense. So tapping is one of my favorite things ever to do with Kendama. I've been tapping straight up like 7 years, like nonstop. This is a concept that I've never really put down. I've always been tapping. Hit 10 tap recently. I've been, the last 2 years really pushing taps hard. Yeah, you can see all my tricks that almost all have to do with tapping. So I'm going to say a few things first that I don't want to forget, and then I'm going to get into, going from one tap to, I guess, 6 tap to multiple taps, and then we'll talk about different things you can do, and different tutorials of how to do a 4 tap, how to do a 5 tap. But I first want to talk about some important things. So first thing is setup. This is really important, for some setups, some tricks. It doesn't, like a lighthouse, doesn't really matter what kind of shape you have. But for tapping, it's really important. So there's certain kens and certain shapes and certain woods that are going to generally tap better. Maple seems to be the most consistent tapping performer. I've tried other woods like bamboo, ash, purple heart. They just don't tap that well. I mean, maybe you'll get lucky with a few different ones, like maybe a bamboo or a birch I've played in the past taps well, but for the most part, just go with maple. And beech, you can tap those, but I think maple's the best. It's something to do with the density of the wood. Shape. There are going to be good shapes for tapping. There's going to be bad shapes for tapping. I own Lotus. We made the element shape for tapping for the most part. So the element has been my go-to for tapping. Even the new shapes that we came out with, like the Mars and the Mala, they're good at tapping, but I always go back to the element for tapping. I think just because of how balanced it is, how the spike length, where the serrato sits, the whole length and the ratio of everything that we did. We sampled a bunch of different kens, different shapes, and this is the shape that stuck with us in terms of stuck with the Lotus team in terms of the best tapping kendama. But obviously there's other shapes out there that are going to tap well too. To know if a kendama, I'm sure a lot of you have only tried a few kendamas before, because if you're newer, you only have 3, 4, 5 kendamas, and that's a really small sample size. But when you finally get a kendama where it really feels like the ken is bouncing off the tama, like maybe you'll get a new ken, hopefully the element ken, and you go to tap, and then it almost is like a 1.5 because of how quickly it's moving. That is a tapping kendama. You want a ken that's just too quick for you, and you'll catch up to it, and you'll learn. But you can tap on slow kens, but it's just not going to be as efficient for your progression as tapping on a ken that's good at tapping. String length doesn't really matter. I'm not going to be talking about juggling or enders in this video. You can see my juggling tutorial. You can see my time of control video. String length, I just would recommend above 6. I play with a 10-finger string length. So 10 fingers meaning you do this. This looks like it's 12 or 14. But yeah, 10 or 5, 10, probably 12. What else do I need to talk about? So yeah, I guess we'll get into starting with 1 tap. I recommend, even if you hit 4 tap and you're watching this video, just watch the entire thing, because there's going to be things that I talk about in 1 tap and 2 tap especially that are going to be really important, that can help you with your multiple taps. But when you're doing a kendama trick, when you first learn a kendama trick, that there are little, I'm going to just call them tricks, but they're little hints or little puzzles that you kind of solve to do it. Like for example, you know, most Kendama players have hit a lighthouse, right? If you've been playing for more than a few weeks, or even a swing spike or a bird, right? And this trick at the time, it's super difficult for me, right? So when you're learning, it's like, seems like the most impossible trick. But as you learn it and as you progress, you will learn different tricks in your mind of like, okay, if I really make sure that, like for example for bird, if I really make sure that the bevel is down and it doesn't spin, and then I hold the Ken kind of angled and not straight up, like these are like a few little tricks that can help you with bird. And then as you get better and better at it, those just become ingrained in your muscle memory, and then you don't need to think about them every single time you do bird. You just naturally will do the things that you learned about. So for tapping, the same is true. That's like probably the most important thing in this whole tutorial that I'll say. That with tapping, as you learn 1 tap and 2 tap and 3 tap and 4 tap and 2 tap, juggle 2 tap, there's going to be millions, or I shouldn't say millions, but there's going to be thousands of these tiny little tricks that you'll just pick up that's going to help you learn to tap. Some of these are going to be subconscious, some of these are going to be conscious, but I'm going to name as many as I know in this tutorial. So all the things that I've consciously thought about and that helped me get to my next tap goal, I'm going to mention it in this video. So that's going to help you think about that and then try it for yourself and see if it works. But the most important thing is putting in time for yourself to learn to tap. I mean, just 1 tap is going to take a long, long time. It's going to feel multiple times through your experience, going to feel like it's impossible. That's never going to happen, but it will happen. I guarantee you. You just need to put in that effort, and it's taken me so much time and so much effort where it feels like I'm special, like I'm not designed to tap. But after hitting 6 taps really consistently, when I go back 5 years when I was first learning to tap, that was just a lie in my head just to, I don't know, make me feel better about myself. But no, it's hard for every single person. I don't think it's any harder for any certain player. I think it's equally hard for everybody, and the people who are best at tapping have just put in the most time for it. So there's going to be a lot of different tricks that you will learn, and you will hopefully remember those, keep those in mind, and apply those for every time you practice. And then it's up. The other point is going to take a ton of time. Even not for 1 tap. It's not like when you learn 1 tap, 2 taps are going to come extra easy. It's not like when you learn 5 taps that 6 taps are going to come extra easy. It's hard every single step of the way. Okay, I've hit 10, so I know that. I've hit everything up to 10, right, over the last 5 years. And I think that people will have hit, obviously, way more than me, 12, 15, 20, 50, 70. I feel like they would say the same thing. I think probably after 12 is when you start to see a little bit of an ease, maybe like 14, a little bit of an ease of the next step, because you learn this concept that I will talk about later in the video. We won't talk about that now. So yeah, to start with 1 tap, you can start from airplane, you can start from pulling up. I recommend learning to pull up at some point because it's important for Kendama progression, even though it's hard to release it right and to get that 1 turn and to pull it up straight. Like, I understand all of that. I do recommend you learn 1 tap, 1 turn, but if you just want to focus on taps and start from the airplane or start from lighthouse or start from lunar, that's fine too. Okay, so I think the first thing I'm going to start off with tapping is positioning. All right, so if you think about the physics of a tap, the Ken is coming around, you're tapping or you're bouncing or hitting the tama with the Ken for it to flip the other way, okay? So this is an example of a concept that's going to apply for all levels of tap, whether you're doing 10 or you're doing 1. If you're going to hit the Ken when it's, like, if it's coming around it and you're hitting it here, the positioning of the Ken, the placement and the direction, it's only going to go that way, right? There's no way you're going to hit this and for it to go up. So that's why direction and position is really important. If you hit it here or even here, when you hit it, yes, it's going to rotate this way, but it's also going to rotate up a little bit. And that is super important as you progress taps. For 1 tap, I recommend in your mind thinking hitting it here, When you look back at the video for your first one tap, you might realize that you hit it here. You might realize that you hit it here. But and meaning like vertical or like, well, 80 degrees. But I would really try to learn to think in your mind like above 90, so like 100 degrees. Because when you do that, you're going to bring the Ken up. It's going to give you more space to do the juggle or to catch it back on lighthouse. Okay, so that's going to come. It's going to be very relevant for. I'm going to probably mention this as we go through all the taps. Where you want to hit it on the Ken is right at the handle stall. Again, you might look and you might see that you're hitting it at the ring. You're hitting it down here. You're hitting it between the ring and the handle. Try to hit it by the handle stall. Even on like the very tip of the handle, I noticed like my Kens will get like really damaged on the very tip, and that just means that I'm tapping right. Let me turn up the brightness on this. There we go. So the crazy thing about taps, and why it doesn't really make sense physics-wise, or why it's such a crazy physics experiment, is that by hitting it, you're also controlling it. And I know that's crazy to say, but like, you are controlling it in, you're using the tama to force the Ken in a certain direction. So if you notice your Ken isn't straight, if it's getting wobbly when it's going back to juggle or lighthouse, or if it's over-rotating, or if it's under-rotating, that has everything to do with your tama and how you're, not your tama, but just your hand using the tama to hit the Ken. So if you're not getting the Ken direction that you want, then you have to think about what you're doing wrong. Okay, let's just get into two-tap. You're gonna learn a lot more about one-tap through my two-tap, through my tutorial of the two-tap. But so two-tap, obviously, you're gonna add one more tap into it. So the same exact thing applies for positioning. You're going to wait as much as you can, and when learning two-tap, you're gonna probably wanna rush it. And this is another concept, another thing that I've learned along the way is timing. When you're first learning taps, because this thing is flying at you and you want to hit it really quick, and you see Takia hit 70 tap and how quick he goes, that's not the mindset that you want to have at all. And this is something that I constantly remind myself of as I'm progressing the next tap. So you want to go as slow as possible. And by giving yourself time, you're also giving the Ken more opportunity to move down. And the same thing happens when you do that first tap and you go for the second tap. It's the exact same philosophy. You don't want to tap late here and then tap early. Okay, that's not going to give you enough time to catch the lighthouse or to go do a juggle. So you can see there, I did the first tap late. I waited for the Ken to come all the way around. So instead of me, going here and moving the Ken all the way around to here, that's a lot of time wasted with my tama. I'm going here, the Ken comes around, I don't have to move the tama that much. Does that make sense? I just have to move it from here to here because the Ken comes around, I hit it there, and then it comes back around. So you see with two tap and with even taps, this motion of like do-do, do-do, And that just shows you that the fundamentals are solid. All right, another little concept that I think everyone at some point thinks about as they progress taps is straightness. I've mentioned straightness in multiple videos, string control video, my tama control video. For taps, it's super important. Not only when you are pulling up or you're going from lighthouse for your first tap, to keep that Ken straight. It's going to lead to easier progression. It's going to lead to less string taggles. It's going to lead to a cleaner trick, to more control. It is one of the most important things that when I'm going for the next tap, if I'm going for 12, I haven't gone for it yet, but when I do, I'm going to constantly think about keeping the Ken straight and reminding myself of that all the time because that's just going to make me have a cleaner execution. But also, after that first tap, so you keep that Ken straight, And you'll be able to tell when it's slightly off or slightly wobbly. Like if it's really bad, if it's really off, it's gonna be hard to tap. But if it's slightly off, you'll be able to see it. But then for that first tap, you also wanna make sure you hit it back straight, okay? So if you hit it like Wong tap-ish, it's gonna be really hard to do the second tap, obviously. But if you do it the first time super straight, it's gonna be way easier to hit the second one. And then when you hit the second one, it's gonna come at you much straighter. Let's talk about positioning again. For 2-tap, I see people do a lot of like really quick ones, and they also feel like they don't have any time to adjust and to react to get the juggle. It doesn't need to be that quick. Again, this is the same thing that I talked about in the first tap. But like, if you get the positioning right with the tap, you can really make the Ken go up. And if it's going up really high, you can do 2 pretty slow taps, right? And still recover in time for a juggle spike. So you can do it really quick, or I think it'd be better to go like extra slow. Once you practice this, whether it's 1 tap or 2 taps for the 10,000th time, you still don't get it, just know that's super normal, but also know that you are making progress. You know, by doing this, you're getting information about how this wooden piece bounces off the other wooden piece and how it moves in the air and how the gravity is affecting it when you're tapping. So even if you haven't laced and it's been a while, just keep going, because you are learning things. You are getting closer to tapping successfully. And I think it's super important just to keep watching and keep focused on trying different things. So like if you don't like the way it looks, or you're not getting the results that you want to get, change something up, right? That's the process of learning. Change something up, see if it works, give it an effort. If it doesn't work, scrap it. But if it does work, then you can implement that into your tapping form. Positioning again. Let's stick on that for 2-tap. People tap different ways. I see some, tapping pretty low. I see some tapping pretty high, like up here. I think that's something that will just come out as you play. It kind of depends on your style, which is natural to you. But I don't think it's bad to go higher. I think that's probably preferred, because the higher you go, obviously the more time and the more space you have down below you to recover. The last thing I'll say when we're at 2-tap is that as you get better at it, maybe that you slice it a few times and you're trying to get it more consistent, you can think about using those taps to keep the Ken elevated. And this is a really important concept, especially later when you get like 4, 5, 6 taps, because it's gonna feel like at first that you're using all the space you possibly can to get those 2 taps off. But if you tap it right and at the right position, the Ken is gonna naturally rise, or at least stay in the air a little longer than if you tap it the wrong position. So like you can see this 2-tap is not the best form, but like, see how that went up? I mean, you're hitting this piece, right? So you can hit the Ken and it's gonna be going up, and the same thing applies for tapping. I mean, obviously you're not hitting in the middle because that would be the easiest for it to rise. You're hitting at the end, so it's gonna rotate as well. But if you have really good timing and positioning, you'll be able to get the Ken to rise, so it's gonna be easier to recover to get into your juggle spike. Before we get into 3-tap, I wanna talk about progression of taps, like the normal course. I think it gets it's equally more difficult the higher you go. So for me, going from 7 to 8 is just as hard as going from 1 to 2. I think, again, once you get past 12, it's probably a little bit easier because you learn the concept of floating, where you can tap enough and it kind of stays there. That's something that I have just kind of been learning a little bit with the 10 and with my like quick 4s. I can tap quick enough for the Ken to float, but we'll talk about that later. But I want to keep in mind, I want to make sure to illustrate to you guys that when going for 3, don't think that you have an extra break, don't think it's going to be easier. And when going for 6, don't think that you have an extra break or that it's going to be easier because you've hit so many in the past. All these rules and all these concepts and all this difficulty applies for each and every step that you take. There's going to be, as you go, even if you have 4s down pat, there's going to be a lot of lessons that you're going to learn when going for 6. And those things can be applied for you to go higher and higher, right? But yeah, I just want to keep that in mind because I don't want you guys to get too frustrated and quit. This is just warning you guys, it's a really frustrating and long process to be able to tap, especially multiple tap. Also, talking about path of progression, I think in general, there's going to be kind of 2 challenges that you're going for. The first challenge is your tap record, and then the second challenge is tap consistency. I think these 2 things can be progressed at the same time. For example, I was had my 3s down. I spent years on my 3 taps. I was getting consistent with 4s, where like I could hit it probably 1 out of every 2 times, 1 out of every 3 times. I would be able to hit 6 1 out of every 10 times. Like I was hitting 6s in the beginning of the line and then going to like a jug stall. And at that time, I was going for 10. Okay, so I'm doing tricks that are getting consistent in my 4 taps. My 3 taps are basically down pat. I can do a bunch of 3 taps in a row. My 6 taps, a little more work is required, a little more effort to get those in. I need to concentrate harder. And then I hit a 10 tap after, grinding it for a long time. But like, you don't need to just focus on, it's actually recommended, I'm going to recommend, kind of separating these 2 challenges out. And if you're going for, let's say you're going for 3, that's going to be your tap record. You can go for that. And then the next day you can just go back to like getting your 1 juggle spike down consistently and having good timing, or go for 1, 1. And then the very next day, go back to trying to get that record 3 tap, okay? So those are going to be 2 different kind of distinct sessions that you can work on. All right, let's get into 3 tap. This is a hard one. I think with odds and evens, that's another distinction that really feel like almost 2 separate tricks. So when you're doing like a 2 tap versus a 3 tap, or a 4 tap versus a 5 tap, because of the way you catch it, it's going to start the same. But because the way you catch it, whether you catch when the Ken's going out to juggle, or you're catching when the Ken's coming at you, those are pretty different things that you got to learn and work on, okay? And even if you're going to Lighthouse, it's different because that final tap is really important. That's something that you're going to be working on constantly, is that final tap, to be able to get that right. Because oftentimes when you go for your record, you get the first 3 if you're going for 4, and that last one is really wonky and crazy and like low or really high, and then you randomly snag it, But yeah, I don't really have any advice for this, but just keep that in mind, that I think most players either gravitate towards evens or odds. You're going to find one or the other easier. I think it just depends on how much time you put in. Like, for example, I was always an odd tapper. I got 5 before I got 4. I was really good at 5s, and I wasn't that good at 2s. Like, I was better at doing a 5 tap than I was like a 2-2, for example. I had a really hard time waiting to release that tama after that second tap. Like, for me, it was way easier to release after the 3rd tap I don't exactly know why. Maybe it's just because I did so many one taps to start off with that I got really used to it. I didn't put that much time into the even taps, or if it's something more just natural. I know most people would say even taps are easier, and they felt like that was more natural, but then like their ones and threes are way harder to catch because it's going away from you, and that makes sense. I think the hard thing about odd taps is the Ken going away, so the Ken doesn't come towards you and land in your hand normally. It goes away, so then you kind of have to, it's hard to like grab it, recover, and then go to a juggle. But the hard thing about the even taps is that you don't have a lot of time to release the tama when it's coming at you that quickly. Like for me, the odd taps was easier because I can get a lot of time for it to go backwards, but for even taps, I would often fall into this situation, which I'll show you. I would release the tama too quickly after the even tap instead of waiting and releasing it after it came around. That was my biggest challenge. It was so frustrating, and it took me years and years and years to get that down. Finally, I had one like long sesh for 4-tap jug, late 4 in, and that kind of got me over the hump of having hard times with even taps, because then the next day I was feeling really good with my 2 taps. But it just proves if you put enough time into it that you can progress through it. So another thing that I remember grinding through as I learned, so I haven't gotten to 3-tap yet, but as I learned, I think it was 3-tap, is focusing on like the first tap, or focusing on the last tap, or focusing on the second tap, and like kind of thinking about which one to concentrate on. And I, again, don't have any specific advice for this, but I think that's a normal train of thought. I mean, you can only have like one thought in your head at once, so when you're going for taps, you kind of have to be focusing on one thing, choose one thing to focus on. And I think the process of learning, you're going to think about different things. So you'll think about the tap, you'll think about the straight, and I think it's good to think about all those things as you learn. And then again, eventually, as it gets into muscle memory, you'll like remember it and then won't have to think about it anymore. But yeah, I just want to, I guess, empathize with people who aren't sure what to focus on or what to think about. But I think whatever you're thinking about is probably what needs to be worked on, right? So like I remember really struggling with that final one on the 3-tap. And then I started thinking about it and focusing on it. And then I thought about, okay, let's just do 2, 1. And although that didn't lead me to lace that very moment, it helped me through that specific problem in my head. And once I got that down, the next problem came up, and then I worked through that. And it was mostly subconscious, but just kind of reflecting on it, it makes a lot of sense because you're learning something extremely difficult. So yeah, I mean, back to the method of progression. If you've been going for 3-tap, it's really frustrating, you haven't gotten it. By going back to your 1-tap and getting really good at that, or by going back to your 2-tap and getting really good at that, you are helping your 3-tap out. Does that make sense? Like for example, when I was going for 10, I just would do 6s for a while. And once I got better at 6s and I went back to the 10, then the 10 seemed to come way easier because my 6s were like way more down registered into my brain. All right, getting to 3, again, a lot of it has to do with timing. You know, you don't have to do these quick 3-taps because that's going to lead to you tapping when the Ken is up here. You can wait till the Ken is down here so you get more space. And of course, you know, focus on making good contact with each tap. Like, I don't know if you can see that through the camera, but you really listen. I think listening has a big part to play when progressing taps. You can listen for the speed and listen for how hard you're hitting each tap. I mean, ideally, they should all be pretty even because that means you're spacing your speed and quickness out among the entire trick rather than doing like a quick 2-tap and then a slow 1, right? You can kind of hear the pitch of the sound. And that's not ideal. You want to have, I guess that sounded the same, right? You want to be able to space it out evenly among all 3 taps. Another concept that came to my mind as I learned taps, and this was definitely a breakthrough, was spacing out the taps in my head. So I could do like, okay, let me think about like a 1 and then a 2. So I'm going to do 1 and then do a 2. Or I'm going to do a 2 and then a 1. And breaking it down like that definitely helped. You'll definitely do that. I recommend you do that for the rest of your tap progression. So once you get to 4, a really helpful trick is to do 2, 2. Once you get to 6, maybe 3, 3, or maybe 4, 2, for example. 1, 2, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. I remember talking to Ben Harold about that, and I think that is a good way to learn. But then once you get the taps down in your muscle memory, you kind of just forget about that, just like anything. Where like now 3-tap is so much of my muscle memory that I don't have to think about anything. I can just do it. Much like if you are a relatively experienced player, much like you doing a swing spike or doing a bird, where like a lot of these tricks really helped at first, but then it kind of came to like, okay, I just kind of know what I need to do to get it onto bird. So it's okay if your speed is a little slow at first for the first 3, but once you get to 4, you don't have that much space to play with anymore. You need to start speeding up your taps, and you're going to need to start getting the right spacing down, because if you don't have the right spacing, then your 4 taps are going to be too slow. You're not going to have enough time to get to all of it. Like if I'm tapping this slowly and the Ken's going up and down, I mean, you can do it and you probably learn this way and that's fine. But then I just recommend you keep pushing your 4 taps and keep pushing your 2 taps, even if you're working on 4, to be able to get the right tempo. Something like that. This is something that I learned recently. I listened to Takia's like 70 tap, and I was listening to the tempo of it, like on my hand, like or whatever it was. And then I went back to tapping, and with that tempo in mind, it actually really helped me get a bunch of taps out. Yeah, you're going to want to find that tempo or get as close to that tempo as soon as you can, basically. I don't think it's necessarily too soon to start thinking about that at 2-tap, because you don't want your 2-tap quicker than Takia's, or else you're going to be going too high. You don't want your 2-tap slower than Takia's, because once you get to 6-tap, it's going to be tough, right? So you can get your 2-tap down so it's the exact same tempo as the best tappers like Takia, and really anybody that's gone more than like 12, 14. Okay, now that we are getting to 4-tap, another trick that I learned along the way was delaying the first tap, which is probably the most counterintuitive thing that you can think of. Because as you go up for 4-tap, you want to think about how quickly you can get it done. But again, going back to that concept, which is, it's funny, I keep going back to it, but also as I progress taps, I kept going back to it. I kept forgetting about it and then remembering to like remind myself to go slow, and then it totally helped me get through that tap record that I was working on. So as you pull up, again, it's gonna be counterintuitive, but like wait as long as you can to hit that first tap. Because with that first tap, when it's down here, that's going to lead the rest of the 3 taps to be in the right position. If you go too quick, you're already going down with your 4 tap, right? A heavier tama, so besides the Ken being good at tapping, a heavier tama is gonna be better at taps as well. So I play like 80, 90, but I've definitely played tamas above 90. Right now these solo Kens are around 80. I think if I had like a 70 gram Ken, I'd probably be playing like an 80 to 85 tama when I'm doing taps. I have been really enjoying heavier tamas recently, not only for stalls, but for taps as well. When I play, I've tested this out, and I get a lighter tama, like 10 grams lighter than the Ken, and it doesn't tap as well. I think that has to do with the just like the density of each object. So as I go higher and higher, I'm on like 5 now, there's less and less to say. Not to say that, again, it's not, less difficult to go hit your tap record, but I've just said everything already. There's nothing special I'll say about 5, 6, 7, 8. There's nothing unique about those that I haven't said already. Just a final reminder that every time you hit a new tap record or you go for a new tap record, it's just going to be just as difficult as the last one that you hit. So I think it's about the same difficulty going from 2 to 3 as it is going from 6 to 7. And of course you're better at tapping, but you're not better at tapping the next number. You see what I mean? And so as you go higher, and you're on 4 and you go for 5, you're just gonna need to learn quicker taps. You're gonna need to learn better straightness. You're gonna need to learn using space and time for your advantage. You're gonna need to learn more, to hit it more consistently. And that's just gonna be an exponential growth at the higher you do taps. So I've hit 10, and to get to that point, I needed to be really good at tapping consistently, everything that I just mentioned. But for me to get to 11 or 12, I'm gonna need to be that much better, especially with high numbers, going from 10 to 12, I need to really get into a rhythm where I can keep the Ken up. Yeah, it's really windy right now, but another point that I thought of is when you're doing higher taps, another quick trick is to forget about what number you're going for. Just go out and sesh, and don't think of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just try to tap it as many times as you can. This is a really helpful exercise just to get the number and the thoughts outside of your head, just to only focus on what you're doing. Don't even worry about how many that is. Just tap with no thoughts or no numbers in your head. I think that's going to help you focus more on where the tama is going, where the Ken's bouncing. The other helpful tip is to switch it up. If you're just pulling up to tap, try to do it from airplane. Going from airplane what's gonna really help going from airplane is waiting for that Ken, which I mentioned a few times. But from airplane, you're gonna really want to rush it and go quick. But if you watch Takia's taps when he goes from airplane, that very first, that's a long gap for him to start tapping from releasing from airplane, or going from lighthouse too, right? It's gonna feel really different. It's gonna be hard at first, but I think it's gonna ultimately help your tap game, including inward lunar or regular lunar, tossing to taps, right? That's all going to help as well. So I think I'm gonna end it there. There's nothing more to say when going from 6 to 7 to 8 to 9. There's not one secret for a certain tap. It's just a combination of getting better at all the things that I've said. I can't express this enough. It's a really difficult trick. It takes a ton of time. It's one of those things that you'll be motivated for. You'll go out and you'll sesh, and you're like, yeah, that's pretty hard, the first day. And then a week goes by, you're like, I'm really not getting it. And it's more frustrating. Even if you're really motivated, you give it a few weeks, you still don't get anywhere. It's one of those things that you just have to almost forget about, practice another trick, go back to it, right? Or like I said, just practice your one taps for a while. If you're learning one, just go practice your triple J6 or something. I don't know. But it's just something that it's going to take a long time for your mind and for your brain to get used to and to get that muscle memory down. So just give it time, give it a lot of space. When you're motivated, you're feeling really good, you want to put an hour in, do that, like for sure, go for an hour and just tap away. Don't push yourself too hard to get a new record. That's going to make you frustrated. But also, like, you don't necessarily have to lace a trick, but if you're just tapping for a while, even if you don't hit your record, you just put so much work into that, whether or not you laced. So that's another important point is you don't always have to focus on hitting it and then getting the Instagram clip. You can just go out for an hour, put a timer on, put some music on, and just do as many taps as you possibly can, But yeah, I think I gave every single point I could think of. Check out my tricks for some tap inspiration. Obviously, check out Takia, Tiblex, Ryoga, Maharu, Goya. Those are some of the best tappers in the world. Yeah, let me know in the comments any tips that you've thought of as you've progressed your taps or something that I may have forgot. Let me know what tutorial I can do next. And yeah, thanks for watching. I hope this helped.